For the great honor to be able to introduce for the first time ever anywhere the 45th President of the United States of America. For the great honor to be able to introduce
nation. In this one moment, it's just almost incomprehensible that they can exist right now. So,
And we are grateful.
so close.
Trigger warning. This podcast is intended for men. Not boys, not babies, men.
This is how we disable toxic masculinity.
We need to kill all men.
This pagan patriarchalism that is coming back out of the shadows.
Feminists hate patriarchy.
It's the woman that runs the show and the woman that runs the community and is the backbone of that area.
I'm a nasty woman. A loud, vulgar, proud woman. Patriarchy. Male privilege.
Are you saying you have authority over me? Go get your superior.
I personally can't see why egalitarianism would be a bad thing.
The assumption that wives should make babies instead of money is part of the patriarchy.
Don't say hi to strange women you don't know.
Patriarchy.
The patriarchy.
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 So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words which the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And that is Exodus chapter 19, verses 7 to 8. You are on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network, and you are listening to The Patriarchy. My name is Tony DePani, and I am joined by my co-host, Pastor Joseph Randall Spurgeon.
Woman, get back in here and make me a sandwich.
Joseph, what kind of sandwich are you eating today?
Well, man, so there's this like seafood store near me,
Okay.
and they make some really good sandwiches, believe it or not. So like lobster, they put on like a hoagie bread.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's really good. And so they actually had a deal today.
All right.
They were giving, so this hoagie usually costs like $10.
Wow.
And they're actually giving well, I mean, it's got lobster, so what do you think?
Yeah, okay. I mean,
That's actually the cheapest item there. So they were giving like a coupon for $10 off your order for everybody who's camping or is dressed as a dolphin.
Dressed as a dolphin?
Yeah. So if you were camping or you're dressed as a dolphin, you get a $10 coupon off your order.
Okay. Why?
For all intents and purposes, it's free.
Oh, man. Oh, I should have been expecting that, especially given today's episode. Oh, man. You have a whole book of that, don't you? You do, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you do.
I'm writing the book.
Writing the book?
Okay. Yeah, for all intents and purposes.
That's a good title for the book. For all intents and purposes, a book of dad jokes by Joseph Randall Spurgeon. Okay. Well, no one steal that idea. It's actually a good title. So what are you really eating, or is that your sandwich?
That is my sandwich.
Okay.
It's lobster. I got it free.
Free lobster hoagie. Okay.
Now, I'm not camping, so I am dressed as a dolphin while we're doing this.
Doing the flipper thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my sandwich, it's not funny, but it's a good sandwich. So it's a grilled cheese sandwich, but it's a grilled cheese sandwich with smoked turkey and bacon.
That sounds pretty good.
I mean, it's simple, but it's good. Yeah.
What'd you have with it? Smoked what?
Smoked turkey and bacon. With, and then I'll put it inside of it. It's good stuff. It's good.
Man, what did you do to smoke that turkey? How did your wife do that?
What? Oh, no, she didn't. The turkey and I went for a race and I smoked him.
Okay.
That wasn't quite as funny as your porpoise one, but I tried.
You tried.
I'm not as seasoned as you in the dad jokes, so.
Yeah, it comes. The more children you get, the more they get.
My kids just know that I'm not serious for the most of the time, and they're always like, "Really, Dad? Are you serious?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, I'm serious. There's a huge bear in the backyard." And they look out the window, and I run around the house, and then I start growling and running through the yard, and they're like, "Oh, Dad." It's usually my daughter that does that one. You know what I'm talking about. You have daughters, "Oh, Dad."
Yeah, the better the eye roll, the better the joke.
And hands on the hip, the eye roll. Yeah, "Oh, Dad." But they always kind of smile, so you know that you got them. They don't laugh.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a kind of fun segment.
Listen to this.
What do you got? What do mermaids wash their fins with? Tide.
The first part was funnier. You should have never thrown the punchline. That was terrible. Did you know in King Arthur's time, one of the Knights of the Round Table collected taxes? His name was Surcharge.
Yeah.
Top that.
What did the fried rice say to the shrimp?
Fry your rice.
Don't walk away from me.
Is that what it says?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Did you hear Steve Harvey and his wife got into a fight?
That's not real, is it?
Yeah. It was a family feud.
For people listening, if you don't know, this is Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg telling each other dad jokes and trying to make each other laugh.
Did you hear about the superhero with a lisp that always worked out? He's Thor.
Bad.
Okay, that was funny. Oh, that's good. All right, let's do a couple more.
An ending again.
What are you talking? How can you not?
What kind of car does an egg drive? A Volkswagen.
What?
A Volkswagen. Yeah. Get it?
What do you call someone who gets mad when they don't have any bread? Lactose intolerant.
Oh man.
Oh man. Okay. Well, those are good. Those are. I don't know. Did you know any of those?
Yeah, I don't think they were as good as my intents and porpoises.
Oh.
In fact, Tony, speaking of porpoises, this is a true story. There's this research group engaged. I was reading about. They're doing this longevity in mammals. They've been trying to actually figure out how they can help porpoises live longer. And so they had this laboratory in Baja, Mexico. And actually, from what I read in the article, some of the scholars, the researchers, that's the right word, were describing if they could actually feed the dolphins just the right amount of nutrients, the porpoise could, in fact, like in theory at least, live forever.
So Flipper's going to live forever. Nice.
Yeah. And to put this to the test, they studied the world's flora and fauna to see if there was any natural occurring organism that would fit the bill. And they finally kind of selected it down. There was this unusual species of myna bird. You ever heard of the myna bird?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so they sent the researchers off to get this myna bird, which you could only get in Africa. And they had to get this one bird living in this one tree. It's so rare in Kenya. And finally, the researcher team, they arrived to get the bird, but they found that the tree was surrounded by a pride of lions. And so they wouldn't be able to get to it. But they come up with this idea, once the lions are fed, they'll be easy to take care of. So they fed the lions some buffalo, and the lions devoured the buffalo, and they lay down on the ground right near it and went to sleep. And so one of the researchers was able to get past the lions, climb the tree, and didn't have any problems getting one of the myna birds. In fact, he climbed down the tree, walked past the lions, and rejoined the group. The problem was the game warden appeared and arrested him.
Okay.
They arrested him for transporting mynas across sedate lions for immortal porpoises.
Oh, I knew this was going so long that the only payoff was going to be you thought it was funny, and I was just going to have wasted like 2 minutes of my life.
man.
Yep. Okay, well, it is that episode, so I'll forgive it.
That one probably will. We just lost all of our listeners.
If we lost them over that, we lost them a long time ago.
All right, so what are we talking about, Tony?
Well, we're talking about elders of the Bible, but more specifically, let's talk about fathers in the church and maybe brothers in the church too.
Yeah, actually, as men, we have all kinds of roles that we fulfill. Oftentimes, you hear people give a goofy, a false analogy of the Trinity to a man. They'll say the Trinity is like a man who is a son, who is a father, and who is a brother. That's heresy. But it is true that each man has a different aspect of his life. We're all sons to somebody. We're all brothers. If we're in the Lord, we're brothers. And you might have your actual own siblings, but whether you have siblings or not, if you're in the Lord, you're brothers. And we're all to be fathers. Every man is a father. And so let's talk about briefly what it means to be a son. One of the things we talk about is the patriarchy. We often talk about men exercising authority. And we've said this plenty of times, but it's always good to remind ourselves that authority comes from God. In fact, authority is wrapped up in the very nature of God. We say Jesus is King of Kings. God is king over all things. And so God made a world that fits with his own nature, and he made a world that has authority with authorities in it. Immediately what comes to mind, Tony, is Romans 13. Every person be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And those which exist are established by God. And so therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation among themselves. All authority comes from God, and it belongs to God, and he delegates it. That's basically, when we talk about that all the time, that's the purpose of Patriarchy Podcast, is to remind us of that and teach us how to live as godly authorities. But part of living as a godly authority is living under authority. And so we have the authority of the state or the civil magistrates that we just talked about. One of the reasons that we don't have a policeman get arrested for lawfully and appropriately taking a life is because he has an authority and he's not acting as a civilian, but as a representative of God's authority. So when a civil magistrate actually punishes evil the way he should, that's not murder.
Right.
One of the arguments people make against capital punishment is like, well, thou shalt not kill. Well, God has delegated to the civil magistrates that authority.
Oh, there's also two different words in the Hebrew for that too.
Yes.
There's the unjust taking of life and the just taking of life.
But, there's authority in the state. There's authority in the home. There's authority even in our workplaces. The scriptures make it very clear. For example, Colossians 3:22, slaves in all things obey those who are your masters on earth, not with external service as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Real authority in your workplace. And that's the world that God created. That's the world we live in. We can't get away from it. They're built into the universe that God has made. And, our world hates that. Equality, everything is about equality. And so when it comes to men, we often talk about how to exercise authority, and we want men to do that, but it needs to start with recognizing and submitting to authority. And in particular, we're talking about being a son and a father and a brother in the church. And it's very important to start with, we ought to be sons in the church. That is, we ought to submit to the authority of the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We kind of think of a church as a voluntary organization. It's like you can take it or leave it. It's like a club you can join, whether you take it or leave it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the whole concept of authority in the church is kind of bizarre to us. In fact, we actually think, because of our culture, we think that either there's only two ways really to respond to authority. which is in rebellion or servility, right? Either with weakness, so submitting to authority is weakness, or it's stupidity. And so why would anyone submit? And in particular, why would anyone submit to an authority of a church? Right? And here's the problem. Who leads churches?
Men.
Men, sinful men.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, imperfect sinful men.
Imperfect sinful men. I know I've said this before, but Calvin has said that if God could have made angels to be pastors and elders, but he didn't.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the temptations that we're tempted to do is say, oh, yeah, pastors, elders, they have authority. But then we strip that office of all authority. Elders are administrators. Pastors are kind of like chaplains. They just inspire and comfort us. But has God placed real authority in the church?
Yeah, of course he has.
Exactly. You think of 1 Timothy 5:17, the elders who rule well. To rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor.
Well, and God's not a God of chaos. God's a God of order. I mean, so he's not going to have his body of people. He's not going to have that be out of order. He's not going to have that without authority. Because if you don't have leadership and you don't have authority in something, it just falls into chaos. Everybody does what they want. It's actual anarchy. And so that it doesn't even jive, if you want to call it that, with God's nature.
Hebrews 13:17 says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your soul as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable for you. 1 Peter 5 says, therefore I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder, and a witness of the suffering of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that's to be revealed, shepherd the flock among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God. It's very clear that church, there's real authority God's instituted in the church. And that means first part of being a son is submitting to the authority in the church. Now, here's a debate, Tony, that people have, is like, what is the extent or end of the authority in the church, right?
Right. Well, that's what I was going to even ask, is let's talk about for a minute the people that say they recognize the authority, but basically treat pastors like they're there to do their bidding.
That's the temptation, I think, of every authority. We've talked about this before, and others, about the idea of servant leadership.
Yeah.
And the emphasis is on servant and not the leadership. Whereas servant rulership, servant authority, might actually be a better phrase to use, in which those in authority are to use their authority to serve others and to serve God.
Right. It's for the good of the people that they're over, the good of the people that are under their authority, not to do their bidding.
Yeah. Now, is there an end to the extent of their authority?
Yeah, of course there is.
So where is the end of it, Tony?
Well, we got different realms of government, right? Different realms of authority. And they overlap some, but they don't completely encompass the other realms of authority. So, church authority doesn't completely encompass the authority in the home, and the government authority, civil magistrate doesn't completely encompass church authority, and vice versa. There are areas where it does come to an end.
Yeah, if you think about authority, actually, in these structures, oftentimes we think of them as like an umbrella over top of each other one. Like you got each one, like the bottom is the self, and then there's a umbrella of family over top of it, an umbrella of church, maybe umbrella of state. Or you've kind of got this idea of like completely separate authorities, like there's no touching and overlapping, but it's more like one of those Venn diagrams where each sphere of authority does touch and connect with each other.
Right. Yeah.
But some people, even like John MacArthur, have said, well, I don't have any real authority. I don't have authority.
Yeah, I remember when he said that.
And he was trying to say, if I give him the best and most charitable view, is that his authority came from preaching the word.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just don't think he communicated it in the best of ways.
No. But I do think there are some that thinks that, well, the only authority comes when he actually It's almost like if he's not saying the word, the Bible word straight from the Bible, then there is no authority elsewhere.
Right. Yeah.
For a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at like 1 Timothy 4, it says, command and teach these things. Let no one despise you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. In Titus, he also says, let no one disregard you.
Right.
But exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no one disregard you. You think 1 Timothy 5:7, it says, command these things as well, so they may be without reproach. There's actually real authority that pastors have.
Mm-hmm.
That is, they do have authority when they preach God's words and when they apply it into our lives. And we ought to submit to those authorities as we can. And so the very first thing about being a son is being willing to submit to the authorities above us and not always looking for ways out, right? A wise son honors his father, and we are sons in the church, every one of us, including myself. I'm a pastor and an elder, and it can sound self-serving for me to spend this much time in our podcast to talk about the authority of officers in the church. It's even uncomfortable at times as a pastor to say that, but the Apostle Paul told Titus and Timothy to exhort and command these things and let no one disregard them. If pastors don't teach those under their charge to submit to authority, then who's going to? And the same thing, if a father doesn't teach his children to obey him, who's going to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
It's not self-serving when a father says, obey me. In fact, I don't know how many times it says it in the book of Proverbs, but if you were to go through the book of Proverbs and see how many times he says, my son, obey my instruction. Oh, son, listen to my words. Keep my commandments, over and over and over and over again. It's not self-serving. It could be if you're only doing it for your own benefit, but it doesn't have to be. So that's the first kind of role that we have in a church. And I think we understand that. And if I talk any more about it, we'll be beating a dead horse. All right, well, let's talk about the other two roles.
All right.
So we said you're a son, but we're also a brother.
Right.
So in the church, I'm a son. I'm under the authority of the leaders, but I'm also a brother. And I'm a man who also needs brothers to come alongside. And I'm also a father. So brothers come alongside and exhort and lift up and encourage and strengthen each other, and brothers even fight and wrestle and poke each other. All those things in real life, those things are in the church. The brother one is kind of easy to understand, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's easier to understand.
It uses that word brother, actually, I don't know how many times. Let me look up how many times the word brother is used in the Bible. 230 times. Now, a lot of that's in the Old Testament, but at least 41 times in the New Testament, and used in a way of speaking to those who are in the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't actually have a hard time thinking of ourselves as a brother, but we kind of think of it as like frat boys.
Yeah.
Right. We're brothers. Like, in fact,
we're bros.
Hulk Hogan. Right. Hey, brother.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's a brother.
Yeah.
Some people walk around calling everybody brother.
Hey, bro.
Hey, brother. Right. Well, if you overuse the word, it doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
But, what do brothers do? Well, I can tell you what one brother did that we should not do.
Stole his brother's inheritance?
Well, that happened. Yep. I was going back even further.
Oh, killed his brother. There you go.
He killed his brother.
Yeah, don't do that.
And then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel, your brother?
I'm not my brother's keeper.
And of course, he had just killed his brother, and his attitude was like, well, I'm not his brother keeper. And he probably had that attitude before he killed his brother. Now, here's the question, Tony. How many of us have that same attitude towards our brothers in the church?
Mm. Yep. Me on the inside, yeah.
Right? My brother's struggling with sin. I don't know, and I don't care. I don't want to get involved. That's going to be too hard, too messy. My brother's just dying from porn. Well, I don't care. I don't know. Better if I don't know. The less I know, the less I got to care. My brother's marriage is falling apart. I see it, but man, I got to pretend like I don't see it. That's his business.
Mm-hmm.
After all, I'm in the church and we pay pastors to get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
Stephen Baker says, when I come to church, it's like some people are like, I see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil.
Oh, yeah. They kind of want to come and punch their Sunday church ticket card and put in their hour or whatever and leave. Yeah, I've seen that.
Part of being a brother is actually just being willing to see what you see.
Mm-hmm.
We often convince ourselves, it'd be bad for me to speak up about this. But there are commands all throughout Scripture about how we ought to love our brothers and speak up to them. We ought to serve them, care for them, teach them, admonish them, encourage them, outdo them in showing honor to each other, being hospitable. And 1 John has to love one another over and over and over and over and over again. So the answer is yes, we are our brother's keepers. And so we need to, part of being a brother in the church then is to look out for our brothers. And here's the thing, man. How many times do people go to church and it's like they go home and they're all wondering, man, I don't have any brotherhood. I don't have any friends. I've heard people that have listened to our podcast wondering and complaining like about brotherhood. Tony, how might, here's some practical things. How might they go about being more encouraged to be brothers and finding brothers?
Well, they could actually be involved in their brothers' lives instead of just going to church and sitting in the pew and singing your songs and listening to the sermon and leaving and then coming back next week. You could join a Bible study. You could meet with your brothers during the week. You could call them on the phone. You could ask them what they're struggling with or just how they're doing or get involved in their life. Go eat with them. Go get to know their family. Have your kids get to know their kids. Have them come over to your house. I mean, there's a plethora of things you can do to get them involved in your life and actually be real brothers instead of just, Sunday brothers, if you want to call it that.
Sunday brothers. Well, a part of, I think, the brotherhood, at least in our church, is going to battle together.
Yep.
Right. When you're in the trenches with somebody, whether it's, really in the military, in the trenches, or in life doing battle together. For example, we going maybe out to the abortion clinic with some brothers, or going door to door, or going to just all kinds of plethora of ministries that you can do together. Man, you see the best in people, you're best in your brothers, you can see the worst in them, and yet you're drawn together because you're in battle. You're defending each other. You got each other's back. And man, there's nothing better than that.
We're going to come back later and talk about what it means to be a father in the church. But before we do, we're going to take a break and talk to a man who has done some significant studying on elders in the Old Testament and the family structure therein and the authority that goes along with it. This is a subject I'm super excited to learn about and listen to, and hopefully you will be too. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be on the line with Chris Lee. You are listening to The Patriarchy on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network. We'll be right back.
This is Polly the Transparent with an important public service announcement. These yahoos over at the Patriarchy Podcast collaborated with some other yahoos over at Confessionalware to bring all their gun-toting, misogynistic, homophobic, Bible-thumping, brain-dead minion yahoos some Patriarchy merchandise. Yeah, they're actually selling t-shirts and coffee mugs to promote this trash. Even t-shirts for women. I'd say I can't believe it, but let's face it, these are the same buffoons that send boxes of Fruit Loops to my door addressed to the Fruit Loop that lives there who thinks he's a parrot. Intolerant pieces of garbage. Of course I'm a parrot. Anyways, this crap is available on confessionalware.com under podcast collaborations. Not that any normal person would buy that junk. Squawk! Hey lady, Polly needs his papers changed again. The lack of service around this place is unbelievable.
We're on the line with Chris Lee. Chris has been a Christian for about 23 years and is a member of a local Reformed Presbyterian church in Northern Virginia, where he has been teaching Sunday school. He is an officer in the United States Navy. His interests are in philosophy, apologetics, and systematic theology, with special interest in how biblical law applies to all areas of life. He is married to his wife, Bonnie, and together they have 3 children. Chris, welcome to the Patriarchy.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
So, Christopher, it's a given you're a sexist for being on this show, but how long have you been a racist?
Sheesh.
Well, since I'm not Caucasian, then apparently that disqualifies me for being a racist.
Yeah, right.
Okay. All right, you got me.
There you go. Yeah.
Can you still be a sexist? You are a man, so that automatically qualifies.
Yeah.
I
You
think
can't
so.
get away from that one.
So.
There you go.
Okay. Christopher, it's good to have you on the show. You've been studying and teaching on the role of men in the Old Testament, in particular the position of elder in the Old Testament. We always kind of think of elders and pastors specifically in the New Testament. But why study this issue in the Old Testament? What's important about it for us today?
So if we understand what this does is it really shows the patriarchal nature of how Old Testament Israel is structured. And then if we understand it from the family level first, right? So we understand with your father, and you have the wife, and then you have the kids. What the Old Testament elder model and notion does is it helps us to understand how that family authority extended beyond just the nuclear families. And so you see the 5th commandment, right? Honor thy father and mother, but of course, especially in this context, honor thy father. And the dominion mandate, which is be fruitful, multiply. And you see those two being intertwined, and I would argue being consistently carried out to its maximum extent within this elder model that Old Testament Israel had. And so as the families got bigger, as you start having extended family, you start seeing the men of the family taking on these roles beyond their just immediate family and overseeing the extended family and making decisions for the community, having duties to rule and to judge between cases that may come up in conflicts between cases. And all of these duties and tasks are basically what the father does at home, obviously just on a smaller scale. And then now you see it on the larger scale with the eldership.
So we often think, Christopher, we think of our family. We kind of think of the nuclear family, what we have right now. And, father, mother, 2 kids and a couple dogs,
Right.
But what you're saying is, no, the Old Testament has given us a much broader picture of the family. And that's, you talk about the elder model. So what exactly do you mean by elder model? What is that?
So if we remember the structure of Israel, right, we remember that it's the family first, and then you have a group of families extending out to a clan, and then to a tribe, and then obviously the tribes of Israel comprising the nation. And so what this ends up showing is that the family unit is basically institutionalized into that very structure of Israel. Right? And so essentially, we can see that the nation of Israel was essentially one big family. And so then, as with any sort of social order, whether it's here in the United States, if it's modern, if it's ancient, whatever the case is, there needs to be some way in order to maintain the social order, to have some oversight over the population. And because of that extension of the father's authority, that's where the elders come in. That's the elder model that I'm talking about.
Okay. So the extended family is you have the man's head of his household, but then several households are together, and then that there's a man kind of over that, which is the elder.
Right, the elder. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes, and so as you would know, that you have historical precedent of this, which is more formally delineated in Exodus 18, right, when Moses and Jethro were talking, and Jethro gives Moses some very practical and good advice about dividing up the families and the number of families that a particular elder would oversee. And so, as I said, because it's an extension of the fatherly rule at home, and as the society got larger, as the families and the extended families got larger, that those men that took charge, what we would term as elders, and how the Old Testament Israel understood it, as elders, they were the ones who eventually took charge of those extended families, and as I said, that's what eventually gave way to the clans and the tribes, and eventually capping off at the nation.
How does this play into when you had a clan or tribe or even just that kind of group you're talking about, the families there? How does that play into what happens? I guess take us through what happens when there has to be something kind of like a disciplinary measure within that group. Like, how did that work out? Who oversaw that, or what did that process look like?
So most likely what would have happened is it would actually first start in the home, right? So let's say if there was a conflict between someone within your immediate nuclear family, for example, and then the father, right, along with, of course, the mother, but primarily the father would be the one to adjudicate and try to work out these issues. Now, let's say we take that between two different families, right? And then you would probably at the same time still have the fathers involved. And then if the fathers couldn't figure out a way to resolve the situation, right, then it would most likely, and let's say the fathers weren't the elders, then it would go to the elders, which probably would have been other fathers or uncles or grandfathers. Mm-hmm. And at that point, the hope would have been that the situation, whatever it was, would have been resolved. And so in addition to the fathers being the first line of defense, you'd have the family elders, and you'd also have elders at the clan and the tribal level, tribal level. And eventually, as you would recall with Solomon, with King Solomon, that eventually gave way additionally to the king being the final judicial authority. Okay. And we could see that eventually played out very vividly with the two women and the remaining son who was alive, and the dispute between those two women. Right. And so that actually exemplifies pretty well the fact that there are hard cases within Israel. And so that was the purpose of the different levels of the elders. And again, with the king involved, that the king being the final judicial authority for those hard cases that even the tribal elders couldn't solve. So if you had an issue between two of the tribal elders, was there somebody over them before the king, or did it go to the king if it was between two clans? That I'm not really sure. It would have been likely to just go to the king at that point. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what are the qualifications for the position of family elder or tribal elder? I mean, the various positions in the clan. What are the qualifications for that? So we know that from our calling just as fathers in general, right? We're supposed to be wise. Mm-hmm. We're to rule and judge fairly within our own homes. And we're basically also able to oversee our immediate family fairly. And because we discussed how the elders are meant to be an extension of the father's rule just now to a larger section, that would be basically the same thing that the elders are supposed to have, right? Wise, being able to rule, judge fairly, oversee the group of people that were under them fairly. And we see also the New Testament elders as well, which is a redemptive historical fulfillment of the Old Testament elder. We see those qualifications being relevant, for example, in 1 Timothy chapter 3, right? And so that's really not merely just what qualifications should be for the elders, but really what we as men should be striving towards in general.
What was their, I'm just interested, what was their role in like corporate worship? Because obviously most people are more familiar with New Testament roles and whatnot, but what was the role of an Old Testament elder in corporate worship and even maybe national worship?
That one, it's difficult to say. We have some gleanings here and there. For example, when Moses gave the book of the law to both the elders and the priests, and basically telling the priests and the elders to teach the nation.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of actual examples, it's difficult to say what exactly they did. But you could argue that just based on the fact of the leadership of Israel and how the leadership were meant to be those that represent God in a way, right? More so in a formal way than your normal Israelite who is not an elder, or even, let's say, even a woman. You could argue then that it's implied that they would be between the elders and the priests
mm-hmm.
in the Seventh-day Synagogue Sabbath worship, and now what we have today in our New Testament context, which is our elders, our ruling elders, and our teaching elders. You could argue that it would really only be the ruling elders and the teaching elders that should be the ones to lead the corporate worship.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But yeah. Mm-hmm.
So understanding this idea of families as the bedrock, and then being able to lead your household well, and then families interconnected, forming society, and then the leaders of those families working together, leading. I mean, that's fundamental for almost any understanding of any passage in Scripture. You think of patriarchy, just how fundamental that is. You can't understand Proverbs 31, for example. We all know the Proverbs 31 woman.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're talking, what comes to mind is the fact that her husband can sit in the gates.
Exactly. That's actually a good thing you mentioned that, because if we don't, we can kind of gloss over that sometimes. But then if we really understand that, right, at the time, the way that the towns were structured, right, the gates was the way in and out, mm-hmm. and sort of a central meeting point. And that's also where the trials were held. And so the implication there, or the suggestion from that passage, is that the woman does what she's supposed to do in maintaining the house and even making business deals, so that her husband can do what he needs to do, which is judging at the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that is. Historically, we understand that that's what the Old Testament elders did, judging at the gate.
And another one that comes to mind as you're saying that is the picture of Job. Was it Job 29? I think is the chapter where he talks about how he was before he before the trial came upon him, before Satan attacked him. He talks about being that kind of man. He went out to the city gates and
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so here's the question for you. People are going to push back and they're going to say that is just the culture. That's cultural. That's all cultural. What does that have to do with us today?
There is a grain of truth in what the objection is when it said, "Oh, this is just cultural." I'm sorry, that this is cultural. It's not, quote, just cultural, but there is a cultural element to it, because as we know, whatever we hold dear in our hearts, and then the subsequent actions and beliefs and methods and practices that we have, it comes and stems from those basic beliefs, and that would be considered, culture. Right? But we have to understand that with the normative command behind the whole patriarchal model, if you want to call it that, is the fifth commandment, and again with special emphasis to the father and the dominion mandate. And we see also throughout Scripture just how the way that the men are meant to take the lead, right, in Israel. And that's why, for example, we don't see the kings as an example being anyone except males. We also have those those passages within the New Testament where it talks about it's the men that are supposed to be the elders, and qualifications of an overseer being a man, the man of one wife, for example. And so that harkens back to the way in which God has structured our society, or structured the social order, and structured humanity in general.
Yeah, so that's all there. But how might we apply this then, specifically this understanding of fathers, the heads of household, but also the extended family, and the idea of families and making up the civil realm and all that stuff? How might we apply that today? Because we're not there. Obviously, we've lost a lot of where we were at. But what do we do?
Right. Okay. So just there's several different ways to handle this question. One is, first of all, to understand, just even from an ideological point of view, when we talk about different political philosophies, that socialism and communism, for example, those ideologies are inherently against the family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it ends up taking the state and as separated from the family and as controlling all of the social order. So just from a ideological standpoint, we can see how this notion of the family and what we're talking about now is basically contrary to socialism and communism. So that's more on what you could consider the quote academic level. But from the nuts and bolts, what do we do now? What button do we press? What decisions do we make in the here and now? I think one application could be that understanding this patriarchal rule and some of the principles we could glean from the elders being an extension of the family and then overseeing your extended family, basically. One application could be that we could continue to maintain our extended families here and now together. So having some thought as to how we can actually physically stay together, as opposed to looking forward to your son going off to college 3,000 miles away. Right?
Yeah.
And if we recognize, for example, that the family is the foundational unit of society, or at least it should be, right, then that's the very practical application, actually having your family stay near you. And then as your family grows, then your extended family, then you start having different cousins and different aunts and uncles stay close by you, and they get married, they have children, and then that extended family can then form that strong network. And that's really part of the reason why our society is really in such a disarray right now, because the state, which is very far removed from family and in fact works against the family, and the fact that we even have this institution called CPS, right, is a testament to that. And so because we have the state being so strong, that's because the strength of the family is basically nearly non-existent.
That is for sure. Well, hey, let me ask you a question. Why did you get interested in this particular subject? I mean, I know you've done quite a bit of research into it, and Joseph was talking to me even before we got on here for the interview, and just saying how much you put into it. What made you interested in studying this particular subject?
Right. So it actually wasn't even intentional, to be honest. It was what happened was I was reading through a book by Cornelius Van Dam, and he's a retired Old Testament professor at Canadian Reformed Theological Seminary, and he wrote a book called The Elder. And the original intent of the book was a justification for what's called the three office view of the elder today, the ruling elders today, right? So you have the deacon, the minister, and the elder, and then the minister and the elder are two separate offices, right? So hence, the three office view. But what he said was very good was that in order for us to really understand the New Testament ruling elder, we really have to understand where it came from, which is the Old Testament ruling elder. And so he puts in a lot of detail in terms of, okay, the elder, the Old Testament elder, as a ruler, as a leader, right, as a shepherd, as a teacher, those sorts of things. And he really takes a lot of time in detailing out, if the elders were being responsible and obedient to the law, right, of Moses, this is what they would have looked like. And so even though my original intent behind buying the book was to understand the three office view, this really helped me to understand more of what Israel would have looked like. And so that, and then coupled with the article I read from John Frame, which was towards the theology of the state, And they don't reference each other in either of their works. The Towards the Theology of State was an article that John Frame originally wrote for the Westminster Theological Journal, but it's on his website now. He also talks about this as well. He doesn't obviously use the article to talk about the three office view, but what he does is he tries to understand what Israel itself looked like in terms of the leadership, the elders, and then did that comprise of what we would consider the state or not? And so between those two articles, that's what really got me to thinking about how that fatherly rule really should still exist today. And then, of course, as we just talked about earlier, it's difficult to do that because we have many different institutions that are working against us. But as long as we continue to inform our children about this, and as they grow and as they multiply, that level of parental and especially fatherly authority can spread throughout our land as our children become more numerous.
What are you talked about not sending your kids off like 18,000 miles away, but what are some practical things to starting right now with what you got? So that in the future, with your children and those things, you can be building up this extended home.
I think one of the practical things right now that people can do is basically talking to your children about this and being very explicit with them and saying, I want you, when you get married, to live next door to us. I mean, of course, maybe you may not literally be able to do that, but maybe 2 streets down. I mean, getting very specific and trying to have them understand this is what you want, but it's not merely because of what you want, but it's really because of your understanding of the family and trying to be close to each other. Because, for example, if let's say my son was in Florida and then my one daughter was in Alaska and then another one was in Maine, clearly just even from the fact that we have such a large geographic distance between all of the children, they're not going to be able to actually form any sort of cohesive whole because you physically have to be together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one practical application. It's continuing to continue to influence and teach your children the importance of all these things we just talked about, the fifth commandment, the dominion mandate, and how that can be most consistently or best practiced and applied through this notion that we've been talking about sticking the family or strengthening the family together and to maintain those bonds and frankly even forming a nation. Right? We could get really, really practical, really, really specific. And I'm sure you've seen some of those memes, and I think you've even said it or maybe shared it yourself, where you had one couple on the left-hand side and then a couple 10 years later, and then there's 5 kids, there's 5 kids next to them or something, right? And then then the writing was something like, "This is how we build a nation." Mm. And yeah, that's exactly true. That's how we do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we'll wrap it up here. But if somebody's listening and they want to get in contact with you or maybe ask you a question, maybe they heard something on here and they want to know more, how could they do that?
Yeah, so the person can just email me at Christopher _Lee LEE 220 at yahoo.com. So Christopher _Lee 220 at yahoo.com.
Good. Well, Chris, thanks for coming on. This was when I knew that this was our subject we were doing, I was really interested because I just think this is something that I think a lot of people haven't thought much about. I mean, like we were saying, a lot of people think more in terms of elders, in terms of New Testament. They don't really look to where that originated from and all the background to it. And some people, unfortunately, in today's day and age, are just very adverse to the Old Testament in general, which I think is quite sad because it's more than half the Bible, incredibly important.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a good point you bring up. And I've said this to my family too, because we're actually going through Leviticus right now in our family worship. And what I said to them was, in order for us to be good Christians, we can't just be New Testament Christians. Mm-hmm. We have to be Old and New Testament Christians. Because there's a lot in the New Testament that's true, but there's a lot of other foundational core stuff that is assumed that is not explicitly talked about in the New Testament. So you obviously need to go to the Old Testament to understand that.
Yeah.
And one of those things especially is family structure and what a consistent and a very good application of the fifth commandment and the dominion man look like? And we have it within Israel, with the family structure, the clan structure, the tribe structure, and really sticking together and having that cohesive whole, and being there for each other, and basically the nation being one big family.
Yeah, that was a good point. Well, Chris, thank you again for coming on. We appreciate it, and appreciate your time.
No, thank you very much.
That was Chris Lee, and you are listening to The Patriarchy on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network. We'll be right back.
What's the most crunk place to go to the bathroom? The Little John.
Little John. Wow,
Yeah.
that's good. What was the foot's favorite type of chips? Doritos.
That's terrible. If Steven Seagal removed all animal products from his diet, what would we call him? You can probably get this one.
Stephen Vigali? Vegetable?
Vegan Seagal.
Vegan Seagal.
Yeah, you almost
I wouldn't
got-
have
yeah.
got that in 15 years.
Oh.
What did the plumber say to the singer? Nice pipes.
Yeah.
Cold man.
If spaghetti
Cold man.
made an action movie, what would it be called?
A spaghetti western?
Mission Impossible.
That's good.
There you go.
Good old dad jokes.
All right, man. Speaking of dad jokes, we've been talking about great segue. Speaking of dad jokes, we've
That's a
been
terrible
talking about
segue. let's speaking of dad jokes, let's talk about being a father in the church. What a joke! What a joke that is. That was horrible.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's a great segue.
That's a great segue.
I'm working on those. I'm trying to get the transitions better.
All right.
Yeah. So we've been talking about your role in the church, whether as a son submitting to the authority of the church, submitting to pastors and elders. Even pastors and elders ought to submit to elders to each other. And I'll give a plug for Presbyterianism, should submit to those, to their presbytery.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's brothers, and there's a brotherhood that we should have, and we need brothers who can lift each other up, be fighting alongside each other. It was the 12 brothers that formed the 12 tribes of Judah, and as we just talked with Chris, that whole structure lays out and is very important for how we think about elders and just the patriarchy in general. And so going off of that, the last thing that we are in a church is fathers. And by fathers, Tony, I don't mean just being married and having a biological or some kind of adopted child. That's one way we are fathers in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But every man in the church is to be a father. And what I mean by that is that there is always somebody who is younger than us in the church, whether chronologically or spiritually younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And fathers look out for those who are younger than them. They disciple and encourage them. They instruct them. They teach them. And whether you're the pastor or an elder in a church, there's always going to be people in your church to be looking out for that you can disciple and instruct. And one of the issues that happens often in churches, well, the hardest part of church ministry is what I call the passing of the baton. Every single one of us every day is growing older than the day before. And
yeah, we're not getting any younger.
No, there's a day coming though, and when my generation will be over, the work that we've done will be over, and passing that baton on. And that may be sooner or later, how many years God gives us. Regardless, even now, should be looking for people who are younger in the church, and not just necessarily younger in age, younger spiritually, that we can disciple and instruct. Listen to this verse in Hebrews chapter 3, 7 through 13. It says, "Therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me by testing me, and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore I was angry with this generation and said, they always go astray in their hearts, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called the day, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." Why would I get that verse? Well, the question is, do you know anyone in your church well enough that you can nurture them so that they don't have an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God?
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's an instruction. We're to encourage one another for that. Do you even know what to look for? And so it's very important that we be fathers in the church. And one of the things, the way I like to think of it is at baseball. You're on deck. Not on deck. You're batting. Sorry. You're the batter. And there's somebody on deck. That's who comes after you when you're the batter. And whatever your position in the church, you need to be thinking, who's on deck? Right? If you're the worship leader in your church, who am I instructing and training that's going to be able to take my place if something happens to me? If I'm the greeter at the door, who am I instructing and taking care of and helping to greet to be able to do this when I'm gone or when I'm not here? Whatever your position within the church, whatever you're serving at, who do you have on deck? It's so important to be thinking about.
I think part of the problem for some folks, or a lot of us, trying to develop real brotherhood in the church, and we're talking about like how do you do that, and how do you disciple people and be a father in the church. Our entire culture is built around being disposable. Like everything in our culture is disposable, and it's come to, sadly, include people. And everything is instant culture too, right? I mean, everything has to be right now, and if it's not right now, it's not worth it. And I feel like that's bled into how we not only view people, but we view the church, which is made up of people. And I think that that's part of it, is there's this lack of, there's just lack of appreciation for eternal work and understanding that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We're part of something that's more, has been around longer than us. I mean, the church has been around longer than all of us, and it will be around with us in eternity. And I think that we've lost that. We've lost that view, that eternal view of things. That this is not like you were talking about how people kind of go to church, punch their card, and it's kind of like a club, and you can come and go as you please. And we have to get away from that, and we have to get back to viewing this for what it is, and who the people of God are, and what God has commanded us of our brothers, of the people under us. And yeah, I just think that it's a product of the culture that we've let seep into our lives and our hearts in the church, and we need to rip that out of ourselves and return back to what it should be.
But Tony, here, let me throw this out. Play devil's advocate. Hey, I'm a young man in the church, and nobody ever comes talk to me, right? I come, I'm there, and there's none of the older men ever come talk to me to mentor me. I don't know what to do.
Go talk to them. I might have a simple answer, but try that first. Before because I think the next thing that probably would happen to most people is, well, this obviously isn't a good church, and I need to go elsewhere. And maybe, hey, I don't know, maybe that is the case, but if you never go talk to anybody and you never actually get involved and you just come on Sunday and expect everybody to come cater to you, you got another thing coming.
Yeah. Some men are starving oftentimes for brotherhood. I see it all the time online in men's groups. And even for men who say they go to church. And yet, oftentimes, I hear from them, they're waiting around for someone to come to them.
Right.
And your answer is as simple as it is true. Go be a brother. Go be a father. Find a young man. Go mentor to him. Maybe you're only like in your 20s. There's going to be somebody younger than you that you can mentor. Or there'll be somebody older than you. You can go to an older man in the church and say, you've been a Christian for a long time. I want to learn and want to grow. Would you be willing to help me? Be willing to teach me? Mentor me?
Mm-hmm.
Find a man you can look to and do that. There's no shame in that. Often, I know what we think is that to do that makes you pretty vulnerable, makes me seem like a weak person. I think it was our last podcast that we did, last episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was.
Ryan talked about we have this view of like the Lone Ranger view.
Yeah.
And it's not how God made us.
No, it's not. We were made to be a brotherhood.
Yep, made to be brothers, made to be sons. And maybe before you can be brothers or fathers, you need to be a son. You need to go to your pastor and say, what needs to be done? Right? Don't, oftentimes we go to the pastor with criticisms, or we got brand new ideas and we got great ideas. And there's times for both of those. But sometimes you might just need to go to your pastor and say, where can I serve? And starting there, just serving as a son, that'll go a long ways connecting with brothers.
Yeah, it will.
And then as you're serving as a son, you're learning what it means to be a father as well. And there'll be people that eventually you'll be discipling and caring about.
So before we bring this episode to an end, I wanted to take a moment to address what's going on right now in our nation and in the world with the coronavirus. I'm not going to add that much to the conversation. I know everybody's talking about it right now. I am not here to talk about whether I think it's as bad as they say it is or not near as bad as they say it is, or whether the government's doing a perfect job or a terrible job. I think that's all somewhere in between. No, what I thought to myself as I was editing this episode is I think there's just a lot of guys out there that, if we're honest deep down inside, we're kind of wondering what's going to happen. That's normal and that's fine. But what we can't do is let ourselves panic or give way to fear. And I mean, what better episode to talk about this on than an episode on being fathers and sons and brothers? About leading and following rightly and coming alongside people when they need us. And so, really, that's what I want you to think about. How are you coming alongside people that need you right now, even if they're not asking? That's a big thing. There's a lot of people afraid to ask for help because they don't want to appear weak. But they do need help. So, for instance, I live down the street from quite a few elderly people. And my wife and I were just talking today about, we need to go down and talk to them and ask them if they need anything and how they're doing. And really, I should have thought of that earlier, but hey, that's what we have wives for, right? But really, I mean, are we thinking about our neighbors or are we just thinking about ourselves right now? Because, if you look at grocery shelves, at least around where I live, it certainly looks like a lot of folks are thinking about themselves. And look, I'm not saying don't take care of yourself and don't take care of your family. You should. You absolutely should. If you haven't gone out and gotten extra supplies, you should go do that now. And it may mean at this point you have to go to quite a few stores to get what you need, but go get what you need. But under no circumstance does that mean that you need 30 packs of toilet paper and 10 gallons of Purell. Okay, that's just being greedy, and that's not loving your neighbors. So stop doing that. Get enough for what you need for a month. Look, even the CDC says that's good, and I'm inclined to actually agree with them on that. But don't go out and hoard things. Don't act in a panic and don't be fearful about it. Now, that doesn't mean just bury your head in the sand and act like everything's going to be fine and, that there's not a virus out there. Look, just be reasonable people, okay? Think about your family and also think about your neighbors and other people that God has created that are living all around you right now, many of which do not have the same hope that you do. Don't forget that at one point, we all were just like them. No hope, flailing around in the darkness, grabbing anything we possibly could, thinking that's going to fill the void, that's going to be enough, that's going to get me through. Just think on that and remember that. Get on your knees tonight for your neighbors and for our country and for the world, and pray for them, pray for guidance for our leaders. Stop being so pessimistic about the government. I'm not saying I'm a super fanboy of the government or everything they're doing right now, but just stop being so pessimistic about it. We don't need that right now. What we need is for good men to stand up and do right. So if you don't think the government's acting rightly, then stand up and do the right thing. Show them how it's done. Okay? So get on your knees and pray. And then when you get up from your knees, make a plan and go do it. That's what fathers, sons, and brothers do. So until next time, if you have not yet bowed your knee to Christ, repent and believe. And if you have, this is our call to you. Build, fight, protect, lead. This is the Patriarchy.